Hi everybody. I'm Beatty and welcome again, my friends, to the Ask Beatty show. And one of the reasons why I love this theme song is that it really encourages people and reminds people how important it is that we actually take a stance where we can work out things rather than deny and avoid and blame and be defensive in life. The fact is that we all go through so many ups and downs. And as a mother, as a psychotherapist, as a wife, is it not important when you think about it, whether or not we're having relationship issues or money issues or substance abuse issues or sexual problems? Do you not feel really and truly that it's important to be willing to take a moment and say to yourself, I want to take the position where I'm ready and willing and serious to acknowledge and address and resolve as best as we can, even though we can't change our histories, the things that continue to get in the way of our lives and our relationships. Is it not about working things out? Is it not about trying to heal and repair rather than simply walk away? Does it have to be about your being right and I'm being wrong? And as I was just saying to my guest, who I'm going to be introducing to you in a couple of minutes, what's happened to the art of conversation? Why is it that so many people these days have such difficulties just conversing? It's not about right and wrong. It's about being willing to engage. And perhaps our extensions in life can be expanded if we're willing to hear what other people have to say, what other people's views are. We look around the world and what's going on politically, and I often say to my sociologist and criminologist husband, we can't work things out in our own personal lives. It seems to be such a struggle where husbands and wives and parents and children seem to be having increasingly more difficulties just engaging in conversation. And I know that when I wrote my book, For Better, for Worse, Forever, just Discover the Path to Lasting Love, and this is an assessment tool or helping people evaluate who's right for you and who's wrong for you before committing to any serious relationship. I know that many people who interviewed me, they'd say, so Beatty, what are the most important ingredients? If you had to say two, what would be the two most important ingredients that actually make or break relationships? Well, I paused and I'd say, look, it's not sexy, it's not romantic, but the reality is that the two most important ingredients that really do make or break relationships is emotional communication and problem solving. If we can't talk to each other, if we don't have the skills, the problem solving skills, which are so lacking, I think this is something in our schools. The kids need to learn at the kindergarten level, if they haven't been fortunate enough to learn some of this at home, how to solve problems. How do we get along? How do we deal with our anger? How do we deal with our differences? How do we deal with the other rather than live our life feeling isolated and fearful and alienated? And yet, these don't seem to really be important values that people really do talk about. Now, I know for those of you who've been listening to me hosting the Ask Beatty show here on the Progressive Radio Network, I can't believe that it's actually going into my 13th year. I remember sitting down with Dr. Gary Null a number of years ago when I first moved to New York. And I had told him that I had hosted a number of call-in counseling radio talk shows on mainstream networks. And that was what we were hoping, what was going to happen to this show, that people would be calling in as they always did previously. And I think that with the network, and I think that, in the middle of the afternoon, people are busy and life has changed, because I remember that I used to host an Ask Beatty show on ABC, and it was actually at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is the exact same time here in New York that I'm hosting the show now. And the phones were ringing off the hook, and you really kind of wonder. So, what's happened in the last 20 years? Our problems certainly haven't diminished. I mean, we're still looking, and every single week, people say to me, well, wow, there's so many mental health practitioners out there. There's so many self-help books. What's going on in the world of relationships? Well, what's going on is that we still have a divorce rate of 48% for first marriages, 67% of couples. You're hoping to find love and you're hoping to find some tranquility and consistency in your life, but 67% of couples who are marrying for the second time end up in the divorce courts and for third or fourth marriages. And again, people are very, very surprised to hear this statistic. It's between 71 and 72%. So we go from one to the next to the next. And I remember somebody had told me a story that there was a man who married for three women. The first one was a blonde. The second one was a redhead, and the third one was a brunette. But the dynamic, and they ended up getting a divorce. The third marriage ended in divorce as well. And what happened was that the only thing that he really changed, in a really serious dynamic way, was the color of the women's hair. He didn't work out with himself. What went wrong in marriage number one? What was my contribution to why the first and second marriage didn't work? So these are the kinds of issues, these are the kinds of questions that we need to be willing to deal with. We need to be willing. And if we're not, we continue our lives on a roller coaster ride. I mean, look at the domestic violence statistics, and this isn't about judgment, and it's not about blame. I've been citing this statistic for years. 3 women continue to be murdered every single day by their so-called intimate partner. So what are we missing? Now, I know after all these years of practicing for over 35 years, having treated thousands of people from every walk of life and gender and race and class, I have learned, now I don't know what you think about all of this, but there are 3 things that we all need to do if we're never going to make a mistake in love again, beginning with ourselves. Each of us needs to be in a good place emotionally, psychologically, and psychiatrically, and we need to be willing to acknowledge and address and resolve as best as we can the things that continue to get in the way of our life and our relationships, typically beginning with our own family of origin. And it's not about throwing away our parents. It's about understanding what did or didn't happen and being willing and open and serious to emotionally work through the things that continue to create barriers for ourselves in our current life. Do most people want to do this work? Absolutely not. And yet that's the first thing that we need to do. I used to tell my daughter all the time that the relationship needs to be the icing on the cake. We need to be the cake. So we have some work to do. Number 2, if we're talking about relationships, with all the talk about mental health, I think there's never been so much talk about mental health, certainly in my lifetime, as there is now. People are still unclear about the actual ingredients that go into a long-term healthy relationship. So if we're not in a good place and we don't know the ingredients that go into a healthy relationship, why are we surprised? Why are we surprised that people are struggling in the way that they are? And then number 3 is my formula. For many of you who've been listening to the show, you know that I did research with 450 people, single people, widowed people, divorced people, never married people, men and women. And I came up with a formula. And people who know me know that I'm a very bottom line person. If it isn't going to work, if it's not going to be helpful, if it's not going to be functional, let's not waste our time talking about it. And this formula, it's an assessment formula. It's not sexy. It's not romantic. It's not even necessarily fun to do. And yet, when you think about it, we assess every single thing in our lives, our phones, our cell phones, our cars, our computers, our lipsticks, our creams. And yet, when it comes to evaluating and assessing what I feel is really the most important assessment that we're ever going to do in our lives, to find out who somebody is and isn't, and to go through a process. And my research found that this process, and here I am, the most impatient person in the world in my personal life, and of course, professionally, very, very patient. But my research found that it takes about a year using the formula, using the 10-step formula, to really be able to find out who somebody is and isn't. And unfortunately, we can't fast forward this formula. Now, obviously, if you see a lot of red flags, if there's abuse of any kind, you're not going to stay in the relationship for a year. But again, it's about, are we willing to actually do the work? And if we are, our lives can be absolutely amazing. And yet, if we don't, look at what the consequences are. So, people ask me all the time, what is your show all about? And in one word, it is about empowerment. I want you, I want me, I want all of us to feel empowered, to be able to live the kind of lives that we want and that we deserve. And of course, the other thing that I mention constantly is that we don't need to navigate the ups and downs of life on our own. It is way, way, way too difficult. So that if you are someone who's found that, friends and family and online kinds of communications are really not doing the trick for you, and that your depression or anxiety or substance abuse of various different kinds, or your sexual issues, your relationship problems, you're just kind of going around in circles. You're not sure what to do. I hope after all these years that I have been able to give you permission to reach out and ask for help. Of course, one of the challenges is finding good professional help, because regardless of people's licenses, regardless of their PhDs, regardless of where they went to school, trust me, all therapists are certainly not the same. And I wrote a recent article, for the Ask Beatty column that I write in Dan's papers, that we have to be so careful that we're able to really figure out whether or not our therapist is helpful, or whether our therapist actually is in fact harmful. Which takes me to this next segment of the Ask Beatty show. A couple of weeks ago in the New York Times, there was a 2-page article. Now, in the New York Times, that's a lot of coverage on estrangement. And the headline was, "Can a drastic cut heal a familiar wound?" And I'm just going to read something from the article. "Many Americans are estranging themselves from their parents as a step to deal with traumatic childhoods, with the encouragement of a faction of therapists and their clients who promote the idea on social media." And this was written by Ellen Berry, who I actually emailed her, and we had a long conversation about this. Now, I have to tell you, before the show today, I was asking myself the question whether or not I even wanted to cite the name of the licensed therapist who has really been promoting this kind of what I call psychic damage, family damage, psychic damage. So here he is, a licensed therapist from Massachusetts. And his view, which I completely disagree with, is to heal from childhood trauma. It may be necessary to go no contact from abusive parents. And he has this website. It's amazing. I actually looked at the website, and it's not amazing, but if you look at it, I mean, it's absurd. You can fill out a toxic family test, which measures your family on a 100-point toxicity scale. And the fact is that there is so little quantitative data about estrangement. And, here you have someone who I believe, and I have to be really careful because I do not want to be sued, and I have not examined him, but this is somebody who I believe is really playing out his own unfinished business from his own childhood. Apparently, he is also estranged from his family. So in the article, I read about this terrific woman who happens to be my guest today, Dr. Katie Murphy. Now, she is a licensed mental health professional with over 30 years of clinical experience, real clinical experience, and she's also an adjunct professor at the University of South Dakota. Now, in this article, it said that after her own daughter cut off contact with her, that she began so bravely scrutinizing other licensed professionals who happened to encourage cutoff rather than repair. So, Dr. Murphy, here we are again this week. I'm so
Yes,
happy. I'm so happy to see you. I'm so happy that you're here. I'm so impressed with your bravery. And what do you make of this? What do you make of the people in our field who they're nowhere?
I'm shocked. I honestly cannot understand how they can put those credentials after their name
Yeah.
and then get up on a social media platform and degrade our ethics, our values, our principles, everything we stand on. I don't get it.
Well, but look at the reality. I mean, you tried. I mean, you tried to scrutinize these people and actually report them to
Yes,
the licensing boards. But the fact is that there is no accountability. I see incompetency going on all the time. And I've mentioned this. I mean, in all the years I've been in New York City, I have yet to find, and this is a terrible thing to have to acknowledge, but it's true. I've yet to find a psychiatrist who I know and like and trust to prescribe for my practice. That's a
right.
problem in New York City.
Yeah, and that to me is also shocking because I expect those kinds of difficulties in some of the more rural areas, but one would not think that it's occurring in these, metropolitan type cities, but it is. There's a shortage of people that we feel we can count on and trust to do right by the people that we're trying to build trusting therapeutic relationships with.
But there is no accountability, and you
No,
and I know is that, once we get our licenses and once we keep our CEUs up to date,
right.
uh, that's it. I mean, I have a patient who was referred to a top psychiatrist here in New York City to the tune of $500 an hour. The session was about 45 minutes. It was a really, really poor, I wouldn't even call it a real evaluation. And he talked mostly about himself. And this woman, she was referred to him because most of her friends went to him. And as I pointed out, whether your friends liked him or didn't like him, I mean, this was a woman who really she needed a lot of support. We weren't sure whether or not she needed some medication, but it was kind of getting a second opinion. And she was a guest, but in her particular circumstance was really second guessing herself. And I remember she came in and she says, "Well, there must be something wrong with me, because
Right.
Dr. So and so is so well known and he's written so many books and he spent most of the time talking about his notoriety and his books and his TV appearances,
Right.
etc." How do we educate our clients, our patients?
Well, that's a great question, and I wish there was an equally great answer for that. But, all we can do is use our ability wherever, whenever, to educate people on how a therapist, a doctor is to behave if they are ethical and practicing, from a true calling and not from some other pathway for what, I don't know, revenue, many
Well,
things.
you talk about revenue. In fact, I have an article right here in front of me that was in the business section of the New York Times in June. And that headline was When Life Coaching Empties Life Savings. Where again, these days, I think it's becoming very in vogue, right? To
It is.
become a love coach
Oh.
and a life coach.
Well, and they have even less accountability or
Exactly.
disciplinary actions for their behaviors out there in the field. They're all over social media, coaches, um, therapists, doctors, all kinds of people putting, credentials behind their name. And people look at those
Yes.
folks with those credentials and believe that they're coming from a place of knowledge and that they can trust what they're saying to be, healthy and something that would result in a good end result, when in fact that's not what's happening at all. And oftentimes, yes, you are paying money out to somebody, and that's the only benefit there is that person is getting the money.
No, exactly, exactly. And in this whole world of estrangement, I mean, you were saying, I mean, this isn't something, new.
No.
I mean, I'm just wondering. I mean, it seems to be becoming more and more and more of an issue, these days. And, I'm wondering, about the mindset. And we'll
Mhm.
we'll never know. I mean, I suppose we're not going to be able to interview thousands of therapists. I just kind of wonder, what the mindset is. I mean, obviously there are situations where repair is not going to be possible and where
Right,
estrangement absolutely, needs to happen. But I would say it would need to happen, and we're not talking about young children, if after efforts to try and heal and repair, that those efforts were going nowhere.
right. Absolutely. I think that what we're seeing more of is not more estrangements per se. I think we see them all the time now because of social media, but estrangement has always been a part of family structure. But the difference is that there doesn't seem to be a protocol for trying to learn how to negotiate uh, conflicts into a workable resolution between a parent and an adult child, or another person with their siblings or what have you, because it happens on many levels within the family. But people want to say the epidemic is that there are more narcissistic mothers in particular and more immature parenting, emotionally immature parenting. And, I have not seen that. I've done an awful lot of reading and an awful lot of research. There isn't um, qualitative or quantitative research out there really to any solution as to what's happening. There just hasn't been any sort of valid research, but we can gain some knowledge from what's been happening out there in the world. And the thing that's happened the most that we can see is that there are changes in the value systems in the generations. And there's
Yes.
been more of a significant shift, starting with the millennial generation on down. And it's not that one is good and one is bad, they're just different value systems. But if you ask the people who are encouraging estrangement or who are using estrangement as a first sort of line of health,
So-called treatment, so-called, so-called,
so-called, absolutely better word.
right.
Yes. Then they will say that it's about the parent. And the parent is always accountable. Absolutely. We should be accountable for things that we do as parents. I'm a parent. I understand that. I've always apologized. I've always owned my stuff. We even, most people don't do this, but as a therapist, I did things that probably other parents didn't do, but I allowed my children to consequent me if I was out of line or I
Uh-huh.
was, and they would negotiate that consequence with the other parent or with each other as they got older. But my kids gave me consequences when I messed up, and I had to carry out that. I had to take accountability and apologize. And I still ended up having no contact from my oldest daughter. And that is something I just cannot ever fully understand how it can go that way so very quickly without there being any attempt to utilize conflict resolution skills, or
Right,
healthy communications to talk through an issue and then set up mutually
right,
agreed upon boundaries. There's
right.
just, it's just ridiculous right now.
Well, if the person, doesn't know how to do it, and I think that most people don't know how to do it, and hopefully if they seek out good professional help, I mean, that should be a primary role of the therapist to do exactly what you're talking about. Tell me, are you comfortable? You mentioned that you're estranged from your eldest daughter.
Hmm.
What happened?
That's a good question. And I appreciate my daughter's uh, need for privacy with regards to her end of it. And so I'm not going to try to guess as to what any of that is about, but there never was a conversation ever, not a single conversation. We've been estranged for 2 years. I was in therapy before that,
Mhm.
dealing with some things in my own personal life. And then I had finished that up, and I immediately ended up back in therapy to deal with this estrangement issue. I followed um, all of the things that I learned from Dr. Coleman, who
Yes.
he's the guru as far as
We know and love. I talked to him. In
right?
fact, he's planning to, we need to find a time slot because he's so busy
Yes, yes.
to actually tape the show. He told me,
Mhm.
he said 3 o'clock, in New York
Yes.
time, that is not going to work. But I mean, talk about a mention. He has had his own issues with his own daughter with
Right.
estrangement.
Yes, we all do. We
Yes,
all do, because as parents, we will make mistakes. And
plenty.
I am not, honest to God, I am okay with my daughter going low contact. I don't understand no contact because I don't have any uh, communication from her as to what has
Happened.
promoted it. So if she needed to go no con or lower contact to
Right,
get some understanding about some things, man, I'm all for it, because in my
right,
opinion,
right,
and this is just my opinion, it has nothing to do with her. I think she needed to step away more
right,
from me. I
right,
really do. I agree
right,
with it
right,
100%.
right.
I don't agree with the methods that they use these days to go to that place. There is often what they call ghosting, which is
Yes.
just gone into the
Yes, gone. Right. I mean,
gone.
was she in therapy with somebody who would
I
have
don't know.
encouraged you? Don't
No,
know.
I don't know. Um, she had moved away right after the pandemic, And I was so excited for her, so happy for her. She was really getting on this path that she saw for her own life. And when she went, she gave her dad and I a whole bunch of rules that we needed to follow so that she could
Really?
spend, yeah, spend the time she needed setting up and establishing her own home, her new work schedule, all of these things. And we followed them to a T, not
Uh-huh.
one mistake. And I even had a conversation with her where I said, gosh, I'm so proud of myself for being able to let myself honor all of those things and not make it about me and what I
Right,
wanted and how much I missed you, but honor you and
right.
watch you establish this life. And I said, I'm so proud of you. And she's like, yeah, she goes, you did do good, Mama. She called me Mama when things were going good. You did,
Right.
good, Mama. And so that was how I thought it was. And that was maybe a month or two before she went ghosted. I have to say ghosted because it was just done, gone.
And there's been no contact, nothing.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
we were actually on a camping trip all together, her brother and her dad and I, and then she brought some of her new friends. And I thought, oh, this is so cool. She's going to introduce us to some of her new people. And all I can say about that is that we ended up having to leave the camping trip, and that was the last time I ever saw her, talk to her again.
how painful. I mean, I would hypothesize, I could be completely wrong, that she received a lot of encouragement from a group to follow this route.
And Beatty, I think that is the biggest reason that and not my daughter's situation, and not my situation, even with my daughter. I love her dearly. If she wanted to go into therapy and talk some things out, man, I'd be there in a hot minute. But and I used to tell my kids that all the time. When you get older and you realize that I made mistakes, I just want you to know I'm in therapy with you if you need me to be, and I'll take my stuff. I'll honor my stuff. And none of them have ever asked me to go into therapy or with them to talk about anything. So I don't know. And don't get me wrong, I know I can sometimes be a bit too much,
We can
probably.
all be a bit
Yeah.
too much, and we all make mistakes, plenty of
Yes.
mistakes. And
But
yet,
you know what? The bottom line is parents are devastated. They are
yes,
absolutely
yeah, yeah,
devastated. And unfortunately, I don't think that the estranged adult children or the people that are encouraging this, especially those in professions where they're supposed to be supporting and guiding healthy growth uh,
right.
for individuals, I don't think they either get it or care that these parents become very despondent. Many of them become very suicidal.
Of course.
We don't even know how many may have actually completed suicide, but when I go into the support group that I now go in to, that was also in that New York Times article
Yes.
um, that Brian Briscoe set up, that's called Place Parents. Oh gosh, my brain's gonna go. Um,
So it's a support group
it's a
for
support group
parents
for parents. And
who are
sorry,
estranged
yeah.
from their adult children.
Yeah, sorry, Brian, I'm forgetting what place stands for. Parent something after child estrangement.
Uh-huh.
And it has been a lifesaver because we get into those rooms and, oh, some people are just really, really sobbing and
Right,
in so much pain.
right.
And then somebody else will say, yeah, we've been there. And then they let it slip out that their child said they were toxic or their
Well,
child
that's the common word now.
Mhm.
Everybody is toxic. I
Toxic.
hear this word
Yes.
constantly.
Mhm.
It is so overused.
Right. Well, and they're using narcissists too.
Yes,
And
those are the words.
they're using it incorrectly. And so I started challenging therapists on TikTok
Good for
originally.
you.
And I would say, are you using narcissist as a diagnostic term,
Yeah,
or are you
yeah,
using it as a adjective? I mean,
yeah,
how are you using it? And so then when I'd say, you've not identified who I am or what I'm all about, yet you're calling me a narcissist.
right,
How can
right.
you do that? I'm not diagnosing you. I
Yeah,
said, well, then I suspect you are smart enough to use a different word
yeah.
because
You know what
your
I wonder?
followers are using
You
it.
know what I wonder, Katie, the the generation of parents, this generation, the maybe the generation before. I mean, we were very much inclined to uh focus primarily on our children's feelings,
Yes.
our children's needs, feelings, feelings, feelings. I mean, that was
Yeah.
the coin term, right?
Oh, sure.
And I think I think that if there was any damage that so many of us did, was
Hmm.
that we didn't teach our children sufficiently about mutuality
Right.
and reciprocity
Yeah.
and compassion and
Yes.
empathy and
Yes.
emotional communication and problem solving. I think
Absolutely.
that I think that we went in a very, very different direction from our parents.
We did.
And I think
Absolutely.
that I think this is so much responsible. Again,
Hmm.
no blame, no judgment. It is what it
No,
is. We're imperfect, but I think that this was a huge, huge component
I think so.
to
Yeah.
what's happened,
Yes.
where you see people, our adult children, with very little ability to
Right.
express and understand the other, even to be able to have, as I was saying at the beginning of the show, conversations
Right.
where we disagree. I mean, that's part of the fun, that's part of the
Yes.
relationship. Let's talk about it, you know
Yes. That's a good point because I'm the kind of person that believes that if you truly, truly want a person in your life, you will
yes,
fight to keep that
absolutely.
person in your life. That
Yes,
doesn't
yes,
mean that are stabbing them in the back or that you are, trying to win, but you will fight to keep that relationship.
yes.
And I don't see a lot of fighting for relationships anymore.
No, no.
We certainly know that's true with divorce. You mentioned those statistics, but
Right,
unfortunately
right.
now we're seeing it with parent-child more so than I think um, we used to. I think that there are some really good things that happen from one generation to the next, right? I think I'm a boomer, so boomer parents, we did better than the parents that we had, but we understood and accepted our parents for what they came from and what they had to experience.
Right.
And I think that every generation that was next did better than their parents in some regard or another. But that doesn't mean that they don't make mistakes as parents, as humans. And
No,
we
it's
should be
true.
able to allow that and work through them. But we
It's
aren't fighting for relationships.
No, it's interesting. A patient of mine who happens to be a father, whose daughter he's also, I would say, not 100% estranged, but pretty close to a hundred
Mm.
percent. So she had promised that she was going to come and visit him with her child. And this was a year ago when they talked about it, and then they had talked about it recently, and then she decided that she was not going to come. So he used a word, and I said to my husband, I said, we never hear this word anymore. He said to me, he said, doesn't she have an obligation as
Mm.
my, as the father
Yeah,
to honor me? And it was like, obligation? No.
yeah,
And she
right.
felt no, and feels no obligation whatsoever. The visit is not going to happen.
Right.
And of course, he's devastated. Nor in this particular situation is she at all willing. And this is somebody who is highly educated and came from what I understand to be an extremely loving, functional family. But the
Mm,
focus was on feelings. It was her feelings. It was
mhm.
always about her feelings.
Yeah.
And uh, she was spoiled.
And not knowing them, I certainly, can understand how people would come to those conclusions as well. But I think from my point of view, and I don't know how this goes over with a lot of parents, but I don't believe our children are obligated to us. I don't think my children owe me a
Uh-huh.
thing. They don't owe me their time. They don't owe me their love. They don't owe me their respect. They don't owe me anything. They really, truly don't. It was my responsibility as a parent to do what you are supposed to do as a parent. Love them, attend to their love, their hearts, their souls, their needs. And we do the best we can with that. And then the rest I have to earn. And as far as I know,
Sounds
clearly,
like you earned it. It sounds like you earned, maybe not 100%, because nothing is ever 100%, but it sounds like you earned a lot and are getting the real short end of the stick.
well, and I don't know because I don't know what my child saw as my errors. And I would love to know what those are, and I would own them and fix them. But it
Right.
was really hard to go to therapy trying to fix things about me that I
You have
had to
no
sort
idea.
of wonder if from
Right. Right.
another lens that I can't say whether that's accurate. I've sent I don't a couple of amends letters. I I finally, truth be told, got to the point where I said
You can't do this.
I don't know what else to do. And I'm going to turn it over to you. If you don't want to be in this family, you have every right to get out of it. But then I think that we need to at least have a proper ending to the relationship. And so I have
You have,
uh,
and that's the
no,
hardest thing, to have absolutely no real idea,
yeah.
about what
But if
uh
you ask the therapist and the estranged adult children in their world, they said, oh no, they've told you. They've told you many, many,
ah
many times. Here's their biggest line: nobody orphans themselves for no reason.
yeah, yeah.
And guess what? I'm sitting in those recovery rooms. I sit in a clinic uh, room and talk with people who go no contact because I treat them both, and the ones that who are ghosted or who have gotten no information. And when I talk with adult children, because I worked 5 years in a college, right?
Mhm,
So that's the
mhm,
age where people are
mhm,
really trying to
mhm,
find,
mhm.
autonomy. They're who they're going to be in this world, not only as an individual, but as a career person. What are they going to do for a living? What kind of a presence do they want to leave um, along the way? So, yeah, sometimes they struggle with parents. I get it. So you have,
Let's struggle together. I recently wrote
yes.
uh an article for my dance paper column uh, on the potential dangers of individual psychotherapy, which
Hmm.
I really feel more and more and more, I mean, can potentially destroy a marriage and
Hmm.
destroy a family. I mean, in my world, the way I was trained at McGill, if there are family issues or couple issues, you bring everybody in, unless,
Absolutely.
somebody is so fearful and they really don't feel safe. And I think this whole safe word is also being really overused, like
Right.
narcissism and like toxicity
Oh, yeah.
as well. I mean, how can a therapist, and this is again where I feel great damage occurs, how can a therapist possibly advise somebody who's having marital issues, family issues, without looking at the rest of the story? It's
Exactly.
damaging. It's
Absolutely.
dangerous. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
And
Well,
yet,
it,
there are plenty of therapists who say, well, we only do individual therapy. It's like, you only do individual therapy?
yeah,
Are you kidding me?
yeah.
But the
No,
consumer doesn't know that.
yes.
Consumer
And you
doesn't.
know what? I couldn't agree with you more because, my concept of this is we don't operate anywhere in this world just on our
Right,
own, not
right,
connected to somebody, something.
right,
So we better figure out how to work well in systems. And if you aren't working well in your family system, and it's not about abuse,
right,
as
right,
as abuse is defined, right,
right,
from medical mental health uh,
right.
avenues, not the new abuse stuff. If it's uncomfortable,
Yes,
it's abusive. If they,
yes, yes,
yeah. So we need to be aware that abuse happens, and yes, those children and adult children may need to just remove themselves from the abuse. Absolutely, totally get that. I worked for 25 years with little kids in who were abused. And
mm-hmm,
how do we reestablish
mm-hmm,
trust
mm-hmm,
when you've been, because you're gonna have to go back out in the world and
right,
trust other people. And how do you do that?
right,
And we have to not repair boundaries. You can't repair broken boundaries, but you can go in and set new boundaries. And
right,
so I get that has to happen. But when it is an abuse, we are not going back to the system to address it.
right.
And I don't know how then you're going to manage very well in any other system that you go to, because
You're
it's
not.
a system.
You're not. And I just had an idea, or I had a thought, and I wonder what you think about this. I wonder whether or not older therapists, people in their 50s and 60s, and maybe even older, who grew up with different values, different training, different orientations, different theoretical orientations, whether or not it would be very interesting whether or not that group
You're right.
is a group that is promoting cutoff and
Yeah.
estrangement as compared to this guy whose name I don't even want to give him his name
Right. Right.
out. I mean, people can read the article if they wanted, who's a young guy who hasn't worked out his own stuff clearly. And I wonder whether we would see a difference in
Right.
the older generation of therapists as
Hmm.
compared to the younger ones in their 40s.
Sounds like
I
a
bet we
research
would.
study.
I
Yep.
bet we would.
Yeah, I do
I,
too. Because one of my sort of draws was Virginia Satir, who was a
yes, of
family
course.
systems,
Of course. Of course.
Um, so, and we keep learning. It's not like we're stuck back in old stuff. We have to
Right,
get,
right,
40
right,
CEUs every 2 years, and
right.
things change, so you have to stay on top of all of that change. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some things that are foundational, and that foundation starts in a family system, good, bad, or otherwise. So we need to be able to address that. And I think that those of us that came from the kind of training that did address family systems and
Yes.
some of the, messages and the sort of
Hmm.
schemas and all that stuff that are built within
Right,
our original system, our family system. And that's how you can then negotiate a new set of boundaries, because
right,
you set a new sort of foundation and schema around a different sort of healthy thing. But you can't do that if you don't go in and, hold everybody accountable.
right,
And it isn't
right,
going to be just the mom or just the dad.
right,
It's
right,
going to be a lot of things. But I will say, absolutely, as parents, we are held more accountable than not, while we're raising our children through these developmental stages. But, they also are influenced by many, many other things, you know, early on, going
right.
into schools and having, some of the peer groups and the different things that are happening in schools. There's a lot of things that parents cannot um, prevent. And we have to attempt to help the child negotiate those things as well, but they weren't caused by the parent. And
Right, and this is where too, I mean, the schools, I was doing some consulting at East Hampton High School last year. I mean, this is where the schools, I mean, there should be a course, a conflict resolution course, and it should be, it's a
yeah,
course that should start in the first grade.
yeah,
And teaching the kids that there's always going to be problems, and there's always going to be issues, and there's always going to be differences, and that the goal is to discuss, negotiate
absolutely.
trade-offs leading to a win-win resolution if at all possible. And the best solution is never going to be found, but it's good enough. I mean, that's like the good enough mother,
Yeah,
the good enough solution. But you know what's so interesting, Dr. Murphy, is that the licensing boards, I mean, if somebody was listening to this discussion, and a lot of people listen to this sort of kind of discussion here on the show, um, I mean, they wouldn't do anything. It's like nobody is sort of breaching what they would define as ethical conduct, and yet it is a breach of
yeah.
ethical conduct. It is a breach.
It is a breach. We have codes of ethics.
Yes,
Now,
we
they're
do.
not written down in stone, but we have codes of
We
ethics
do.
and
We
we are
do.
supposed to honor them.
We do.
And I take that very seriously.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
have it. I've taught it. Um,
Yeah.
I keep
Yeah.
them very, very close. So you have to, and I think it's how you get a good reputation. You do good work. You don't get turned in for doing things that are harmful. We have a do no harm. Do no
Yes, we
harm.
do. But
You
there is
know,
no accountability. I
no,
mean,
and I say
unless
I've reported on many, many, many state levels. I've even reported internationally.
so
So,
what happened? You'd write a report, or you'd
yep,
send in something. I also reported somebody who really talk about an ethical breach.
right,
And I got a letter back from the New York State Licensing Board saying that because I was not the patient,
right,
that they weren't interested in what I had to say at all.
right.
End
I
of
sent one
story.
into the Florida board and they said,
Uh-huh.
we're only interested if they broke laws.
Yeah, yeah. So
Broke
this is the
laws.
thing,
So they're
right?
out there harming
Right.
people. Now, here's the other thing that I find very interesting, and I have yet to find an answer, at least in my Midwestern living situation. We have licenses that only allow us to practice in the state we're licensed in,
Right.
right? I,
Right.
I'm licensed in 4 states because
Right.
I sit on a border. You have 3 of them. And
Right.
when I was at the university full time, we sat on the border of another one. So I have my license in 4 states. I can only treat people who live in those states. If they go off, like somebody from Minnesota goes to Colorado
Right.
and they want to do a telehealth session, I can't do it because they're
Right.
not in the state that I'm licensed
Right. That
in.
you're licensed. They're
Right,
gonna have to make some adjustments. I mean, with Zoom, I mean,
right.
people move, people travel. I mean,
Yes.
there are a lot of adjustments I think that our licensing
Absolutely.
boards are going
And
to
they're
have to.
working on them. They're working on them. There's a compact that they're working on where if you are licensed according to the general consensus, which is a national board of certified counselors, and I assume it's the National Board of Social Workers and so on
Right,
and so on, then they're working on that. And not
right.
all the states are have signed on to the compact yet, but eventually that's where it'll go. But it isn't that right now. So
Uh-huh.
I don't understand how somebody licensed in Massachusetts can be on TikTok putting their initial
Yes,
and
yes, yes.
promoting these kinds of things
Well,
because you
he's
want,
got quite a, he's got, I mean, he's got
oh,
quite a following. I mean, it's quite remarkable
yeah, it is.
how he has managed. I mean, to even be interviewed by
Hmm.
a top writer in the New York Times.
Right,
I mean,
right.
that is, I mean, he must be ingenious when it comes to social media. I mean,
Oh,
clearly.
clearly. Many, and they are, many of them are, and
Yes,
they're all peddling books and podcasts.
yes. Everybody's peddling books
Yeah,
and well,
yeah.
listen, I can't believe it. It's 3:56
Oh,
here.
wow.
Very beautiful and sunny and not much humidity in New York today. And I have to tell you, I mean, we could talk for hours, and I
Oh,
really want to thank you so much for, agreeing to come on the show. I'm glad that I found you through the story in the New York Times. And let's plan on continue, okay,
oh,
to be
yes.
in contact. This
Yeah,
show is going to be on the Progressive Radio Network archives. We will make sure that you get the link. You're going to be able
nice.
to use it in any way you want. All your contact information is going to be included. So people who want to talk to
Oh,
Dr.
great.
Murphy will
Oh,
be able to,
yeah, absolutely.
will
Let
be
me
able to
tell you
reach you.
this one thing before we go. We are planning a symposium, Places planning a symposium next year to address estranged adult
Well,
children
that's
and
certainly,
parents.
unfortunately, really needed. Well,
Yes,
listen,
unfortunately.
again, I want to thank you so much
Yay.
for coming on. And of course, with my listeners, my loyal listeners for all these years, I want to thank you all, of course, for listening as you have been for all of these years. And I always hope that there's some little thing that I've said or my guests have said that can really make a positive difference in your life. And I want to leave you with my two weekly messages, the same weekly messages every week. The first is to make sure that you're doing everything that you could possibly do, including finding a good, qualified, sane therapist if need be, to help you live the life that you deserve and to live your life in ways that are really in your best interest. And secondarily, and this is so apropos to what we've talked about today, we all need to do a much better job in learning to deal and negotiate differences and even to accept and hopefully get to a place where we can even love the other. So again, thank you everybody for being with Dr. Murphy and myself today. And I'll talk with you next Monday and every Monday from 3 to 4 p.m. live Eastern Standard Time here in New York City. So take good care. Love yourself, love each other. It'll be a better world. Goodbye, everybody.